Welcome to No Room for Phonies. The last episode of 2023.
And it happens to be episode 103.
Yes, that's right. And we're into our series called Books Worth Reading. And so today we're just going to do a brief kind of overview of the book Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself by Nedra Glover Tawwab. And I would say this is probably the best book I've ever read about boundaries.
Yeah, me too.
It's very practical.
And it goes beyond the setting of boundaries and the why, but also the aftermath and how to cope.
Right. Yeah, that's the part that I think it gives you a lot of peace about actually setting boundaries that are really hard to do. Mm-hmm. And I know in past experiences for us where we've had to set boundaries, we've never really had anyone explain it
right
that way, mm-hmm. the way that she does. So her feeling is that life without boundaries is overwhelming and chaotic. And the kinds of things that she describes are things like codependency and lack of peace and relationships that aren't very fulfilling. Mm-hmm. So she gives an outline of the signs that you need boundaries, and I thought that they were really good.
Yeah, that's one thing that was different is from other books we've read.
And just counseling that like we've had around boundaries.
Yeah, it's looking for the red flags that kind of show. And I was surprised that some of them... that
like
kind of
feeling overwhelmed and resentful. Mm-hmm. Avoiding phone calls or interactions with people, mm-hmm. feeling that you help people but you get nothing in return, feeling burned out, daydreaming about dropping everything and disappearing. Mm-hmm. You have no time for yourself. You have difficulty communicating in relationships, and you're always afraid that someone's going to be mad at you.
Yep.
So, I mean, those are pretty substantial things. I thought the one about avoiding phone calls or interactions, you know how you say, oh, just wish that person wouldn't call me, or mm-hmm. I don't want to hear from that person. Mm-hmm. Like that's... It's
a sign that you need a kind of boundary.
Like a boundary with them.
What I found, I don't know if you have it in your notes, but the different types of boundaries, like around time. And like it was more than just how people talk to you. It was like how much time they take of your time.
Yeah.
Money.
I mean, the way she talks about it is that creating healthy relationships through boundaries is actually a courageous act, and that boundaries are the gateway to having healthy relationships mm-hmm. with people. And boundaries, like I always said that I wanted to not have expectations of people, but I mean, she's calling boundaries expectations and needs that help you feel like safe and comfortable mm-hmm. in your relationships.
Right. I think that's one kind of expectation. There's also the dream big expectations where you kind of expect somebody to be perfect.
Yes.
Or you have kind of
to fit within.
Where it's a little bit becomes controlling other people.
Yes.
That's when the expectations.
Well, then the other person needs boundaries, basically. She talks about 3 levels of boundaries. She talks about porous ones, which are loosey-goosey and you're just kind of... And then she talks about like rigid, where you can't, like where you don't bend at all, even when it's necessary.
Right.
And then she talks about the one she's describing in the book as healthy.
As healthy, yeah.
So...
But she also kind of gives you grace if boundaries is a completely new behavior for you.
Right.
To like porous boundaries is okay to start with. If that's all you can handle, it's something.
Right. And sometimes you have to feel like you're being a bit rigid about things in order to make things work at the beginning. Like I remember.
There's that too. Yeah. Well, with my mom.
We did that. Like we were very strict about it. Yeah. And then you could kind of... Mm-hmm. She talks about the short-term discomfort for the long-term healthy relationship that's worth the time. And she basically calls it 2 steps. Verbally communicate your needs and uphold what you communicate through your behavior, mm-hmm. which sounds easy, but we all kind of get caught up in that sort of, well, it's my mom or it's my friend or that person's lonely or that person's going through a hard time. So I better just let them.
Let it slide.
Right.
Yeah.
And she really thinks that.
For healthy boundaries,
Yes.
your behaviors need to reinforce the words that you've said.
Yes. And that takes a lot of courage sometimes, right? And she also talked about how people respond to boundaries, like with pushback and limit testing, plain out ignoring and rationalizing and questioning, and being defensive and ghosting, and silent treatment, and then kind of acceptance.
Right.
And I have experienced all those things from people. That kind of like, well, if you're not going to do exactly what I tell you
Then
or what
I'm
I
out.
want you to do, well, then I'll just ignore you, right?
Or some of the other ones. Or the anger, the blow up,
Yeah.
right?
And I mean, I think the other thing.
But what if somebody's ghosting you because they're having their own boundaries?
Well, that's not fair.
No, because
Like,
boundaries are supposed to be articulated. They're not
Yeah.
supposed to be you're reading my mind about
Right.
what a boundary I'm putting.
Yes.
Yeah.
and I mean, like, it's not like you sit down and have a meeting. I don't
Not
think.
always.
But I mean, something's said to you and you don't like it, like you don't agree with it. And like, to me, a boundary is that, it has to rise to a level of it's important to me to say something. But if it just becomes this thing where the person says the same thing over and over and over again and you don't agree and you just sit there quietly, like, to me, a boundary is actually saying, no, I don't agree with that. I won't ever agree with that. And then they have to accept that boundary.
Right.
So, and that can
And it
be
can
a
be
cause
like- right.
for somebody to ghost you then.
Right. But it can also be, I really value our friendship. I know that you won't consider a slight possibility that I might be right. And I have considered and thought through your stance. And
Right.
I see why you're coming to it, where you're coming from. I still can't bring myself to agree with you.
Yes.
So I think we just need to move on from
Right.
that topic.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think people are often that explicit about things.
No.
But she is right. And then she also talks about the reason that we don't set boundaries, which I thought was really interesting. Like, she gets into a lot of detail, but like the fear of being mean or rude. You are generally a people pleaser, so you don't want to do that. You're anxious about the future interactions after the boundary is set, and you have no clue where to start. You get your value from helping others. You believe you can't have boundaries in certain types of relationships.
Well, going back to the Enneagram, I think people who serve others and who do acts of service as their love language,
Right.
I think they have a hard time with boundaries around that type of, like, where somebody takes advantage. Well, first you just willingly give and do things for people, and then all of a sudden there's a switch that's flipped and you start feeling like you're taken advantage of.
Yes. Yes.
So I think, and then there's people who that's not their first go-to is to do things for other people. That doesn't mean that they're selfish. It's just
No.
that's not where their
No.
brains are. It's not their
No.
love language. It's not their
No.
Enneagram number, whatever.
Right. No.
So, but they have different issues for with boundaries.
Right. Right. It's like there are people who don't even see when they're being,
Taken advantage
yes, they just give in to whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that happens a lot between like adult children and parents. Both ways.
of. Both ways.
Because you're like, well, this is my child. I need to do for them. I need to whatever. And then the other way around, well, I can't tell my mother that.
Right.
So it just becomes this
Becomes the
endless
cycle.
And she says it is necessary and even, well, it's not her, it's a quote by Mandy Hale. It is necessary and even vital to set standards for your life and the people that you allow in it. Like, she's very focused on the fact that you actually don't have to like allow certain people into your life.
Your life.
And it doesn't mean that you never have to see them, but it's like quantity and quality of time that you spend with certain people, right?
It's very interesting. I think this comes from a very Western individualistic point of view. I think in a culture that's more group based, and
Yeah.
I think that there might be a lot more struggle for some cultures to figure out where the boundaries are because of the
Just
interdependence,
their culture,
cultural
right?
ways of how the family is,
Right.
indebted to each other and that kind of thing.
Well, and I mean, culturally, some, parents move in with their children. Like, it's a different.
And the expectation is that
Yeah, I would say this is very Western, but I think that there are aspects of it that just apply to everything.
yeah,
I think that boundaries are even kind of more important when you live either in close proximity to each other or in the same house.
right.
Like if you were going to live long term.
I would love to talk to like a Japanese family or Korean family where the expectation was that the eldest son would, if there is a son, would take care of the parents in their old age. And that meant that his wife or the daughter-in-law would be in charge of their health care,
Yeah.
their physical care, their like.
But I
everything.
mean, I even
and I'd
think
love to
too-
know, but they also would take care of the children. The grandparents, when they're healthy, would also, in exchange for taking care
Right,
of
they'd
the
be
grandchildren.
babysitting while
But I'd
everyone's
love to know how
working.
much is articulated because
Yeah.
some of those cultures don't articulate things the way we do.
No,
they just kind of
exactly.
know.
But I mean, I
implicitly.
even think of like when we got married and you were the youngest, and, the whole idea of the eldest son and how that was even treated in your Mennonite culture.
Yeah.
And it was never discussed except when I said,
Hey.
hey, excuse me, like you're thousands of miles away. We're trying to look after your mom and dad.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
so I just think and I think she really talks about this idea of when someone intentionally tries to make you feel bad, then they are guilt tripping you. And they want you to agree to do something, even though you haven't done what they've accused you of. And she says you have to call it out exactly as it is. Like you have to actually say to them, are you trying to make me feel bad?
Right.
And I think that would be a
Or,
really
or
hard
if somebody
thing.
says, I'm just joking. So then you can say, so can you tell me what it is that makes this funny?
Right.
You know,
And I used to do
I
that.
think you're laughing at my
and I
expense.
used to do that with kids at school. And they said, oh, we were just kidding. Well, how come that person over there is not laughing if it's a joke? It's kind of the idea of like, I'm feeling bad, not like I was part of a joke.
Right.
So are you trying to make me feel bad? And now that you're saying it's a joke, how come I didn't see it as a joke? Like, am I? And then people can turn it on you, say, well, you have no sense of humor and you're
Yeah,
this.
they can gaslight you.
Yes.
So, but that's when you can say the boundary.
Right.
You can say, well, I realize you might have a really sarcastic sense of humor. I don't appreciate when I'm
And I
the
got
target.
hurt by this.
And I
Like,
don't appreciate when I'm
No.
the target. So,
and I mean, she talks about the idea of the difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness. And assertiveness is just being clear and direct, identifying expectations or declining an offer, dealing with your discomfort, your guilt, your fear, your sadness, your remorse, your awkwardness, in order to just be direct.
and this comes back to both white privilege and male privilege because men can do this freely without fear of something
Oh,
happening,
100%.
but women cannot.
And groups of women too. Like I know when I have been very clear about things that the way something's going, and I've said completely out how it is. Most of the time it's respected.
yeah.
Of course, there's a big emergency right now outside, but that's okay. I like this line too that she says, when setting boundaries, never ever apologize or explain, and don't waver and don't say too much. So I thought that
Yeah.
was kind of interesting too. Like, this is who I am and this is where I stand. And I think she also is saying that you have to set boundaries from a healthy point in your own life. Like, you have to be at a point where you've dealt with your own
Right.
crap, or
Mm-hmm. And-
else
and
you're
you could
coming from a
also
place
be-
of being wounded, and then you're just wounding other people.
Right. But I mean, we're never perfect. So
No,
it's
but
all
I'm
a
just
growth.
saying, and you can say, hey, I set that boundary, and, I'm looking back on that, and I realized I was setting that boundary from a place of feeling really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that hurt people hurt people. So there's nothing wrong with saying,
Yeah.
like, I'm really sorry that I
Right. I
did that. I wasn't in a good
need to
place
ease
right
off
then,
and- yeah.
right? Setting limits should not disrupt a healthy relationship. And she cautions you to avoid conversations that lead you to be emotionally drained. And always be ready to compromise and never set boundaries to retaliate. And I thought that was one of the most important things she said. Like, boundaries should make a relationship healthy. They should not be set to get back at somebody.
Right. Because then it's
It just
not
doesn't
really a
work.
boundary. It's an attack.
And when we want people to respect our boundaries, it may be necessary to repeat them. And confidence in your boundaries is the cure for self-sabotage, which I thought was a beautiful statement, right? Like, if I really understand myself and know what I'm comfortable with from other people, and not that everything's, she's not saying like everything's perfect all the time. It's just, but with the real people that you really interact with a lot, that you consider to be, you almost don't need to set boundaries.
Right.
Because everybody kind of respects who you are and doesn't.
Or it's a temporary thing.
Right,
Right.
right. But I just thought that was, but when you're always feeling like, okay, I'm always being used or always being taken advantage of, why is that happening? Well, that's self-sabotage. So if you're very confident in your boundaries and you know yourself and what makes you feel healthy, then that's confidence in your boundaries.
Right.
And your expectations are reasonable, right? So, and she calls self-betrayal changing who you are and what you believe in order to stay in a relationship.
Wow. That's really
Right?
powerful. Yeah.
Pretending to be someone other than who you are and comparing yourself and then making negative statements about yourself. So she really is, there's so much in this book. I mean, that's just a very basic
Right.
kind of overview, but she gets into so much detail about things. And I think you really walk away understanding what the true meaning of setting boundaries is and how important it is.
Well, and I just thought as I've been reading it that, I could reflect back to 20 whatever years ago when we had to do this with my mom. And then things that we did with our kids when they were teenagers, some boundaries that we set up for the time being because of their maturity. But now at the age I'm at now, the boundaries are feeling different.
Yeah.
And I'm discovering, I can just set a small little boundary here and I don't have to be mean about it.
No, exactly.
And it's okay.
You can be explicit.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it's just a matter of saying, like, this, even though you want me to do this for you, this over here is a priority in my life right now. And I need you to be flexible around this priority in my life. So it's not mean.
No.
It's just being, explicit. And I mean, I think that when you're in a healthy relationship, you don't have to sit down, and have a
long
meeting.
No.
You can, like, we set boundaries for each other.
Yeah.
Please don't keep, doing this or doing that. I find it upsets me or it.
Right. And, and with our kids, I've said things like, the last few phone calls, I've really noticed that you've only talked about yourself and you've never really asked us about. I said, I know it's an expectation, but it would be kind of nice if you. But
she does talk about that height
as a kind of boundary.
Yeah, but she does talk about boundaries as being reasonable expectations.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's verbally communicating reasonable needs and then not giving in when people don't respond appropriately to those needs, right? When I say no, I mean no, and I not get talked into doing things.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's probably one of the hardest things for me because I'm
what you do.
I'm kind of like, well, I can put up with that. It's fine.
Or
and
I
then
can do
I
it
d-
faster.
Well, no, I'm not even thinking about that.
Okay.
I'm thinking about like going and doing something when I really don't feel like doing it,
Right.
or being talked into doing something when I don't really. That's not what I really want.
Right.
And I've been able to be more. But I think one of the things that I took in the most from this book was just the idea is that I don't have to feel uncomfortable or mean about being assertive,
Right.
because that's just being clear and direct, which is what I am, but I always feel bad about it because I've been made to feel bad,
yeah.
right? By people who are not as healthy as
Right.
what they could be. So it's a matter of everybody getting healthy, which is why we're spending time this year on some of these books worth reading.
Yeah.
Because
Because
they do help you.
It doesn't matter how many listeners we have, if it's just, a small number of you that take these summaries and go and read the book, that's what we hope for.
Yes, exactly. Now, I can't remember what book we're reading next, but it doesn't really matter.
Nope. We'll be
I'll put
announcing
it out.
that then.
I'll put it out on Facebook or whatever. I do have it written somewhere, but I forgot to put it at the bottom of this, so that's just the way it goes. So thanks for joining us, and I really do hope that you do pick up the book by Nedra Glover Tawwab, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself, because it is a book worth reading. So thanks for joining us.
On No Room for Phonies, episode 103.